This video is sponsored by longtime partners of the show, Raycon. So it's a new year, and I'm sure tons of you are getting into new habits, be it fitness or mindfulness, and if so, you're going to need the right tools to help you along the way. Personally, I use Raycon's everyday E25 earbuds for my daily wellness, and real talk for a sec, I just find other brands annoying and uncomfortable. But the E25s, however, feel snug, sound amazing, and won't break the bank since they're about half the price of other premium brands. Best of all, Raycon also supports often demonetized content much like this, so if you'd like to both support the show and get yourself a little something, then head on over to buyraycon.com/raimbot to get 15% off your very first order. Again, that's buyraycon.com/raimbot for 15% off, and now on to the episode. For many, true horror is when a place of sanctuary gets infringed upon, especially by a stranger or even worse, someone who wishes to do us harm. The first place to probably come to mind here would be our homes or our bedrooms. Imagine someone breaking in while you sleep, or even worse, living right under your nose. With that said, what if an intruder wasn't necessarily haunting you physically, but instead doing so from a distance? There's no denying that these days our phones are a part of us. No matter how much we would like to deny it, in many ways they become extensions of our very being, and to lose control of them could mean destabilizing our entire lives and mental well-being. The constant paranoia would be exhausting. We'd never know if we were being watched or listened to, maybe even having our locations tracked. This steep unease plagued not just one, but several individuals residing in Washington state a little over a decade ago in an incident known as the Kirkendall phone stalking case, and here is how it happened. What would eventually morph into a tangled web involving dozens of people all started with one family, the Kirkendalls. In February of 2007, the family began receiving strange messages from an unknown caller, ID'd only as restricted. At first, the comments made by the caller seemed juvenile, something a teenage boy might assume passes for legitimate comedy, but it didn't take long at all for things to take a dark turn. The messages became more and more volatile and even threatening. The caller or callers would deliberately intimidate the family and make them question their safety. And to make matters even worse, it seemed like whoever was doing this actually had some bite to back up their bark. According to local coverage in the News Tribune, the attackers quite literally had their eyes on the family, presumably hacking into their phone's cameras in order to spy on their every move. At one point, they received a message in which the caller described the clothing worn by Courtney, the household's 16-year-old daughter, and believe it or not, it gets even worse. The Kirkendalls were not only being watched, but were also being recorded, their own conversations often sent right back to them in the form of voicemails which the family would receive almost daily. At some points, the harassment even escalated to the point where the family might have actually been in physical danger. They reported hearing, quote, banging and screaming at their windows at night on more than one occasion. As anyone would, the Kirkendalls went to the local police to report the ongoing harassment, but instead of a solution, they were met with a bizarre twist. When the restricted number was traced, it led back to Courtney, the very girl who was supposedly being spied on via her phone camera by some clandestine creep. But why would this be? The Kirkendalls insisted that Courtney wasn't responsible, and according to them, the phone had been acting on its own. Yes, you heard that right. The family would claim that they tried to make the mysterious outgoing messages stop, and when all else failed, they even turned off Courtney's phone, which would somehow turn itself back on again. In fact, the family was so convinced that someone else was doing this that they themselves volunteered a cash reward for anyone who could help expose their stalkers. It goes without saying that police, on the other hand, were skeptical, and many simply pointed the finger at the teenage girl, but as this was going on, more trouble was brewing elsewhere. The nearby Price family had also been enduring the same harassment, presumably due to their relation to the Kirkendalls, as the two mothers of the households were sisters. The pair found themselves in a joint effort to make the calls stop and to clear Courtney's name. After all, she seemed to bear the brunt of the attacks. The mother and aunt at one point decided to pay a visit to police to follow up on the investigation, and that's when they received yet another message. This time, the voicemail contained their conversation with detectives, a clear dismissal by whoever it was listening in on them. By this point, Courtney's runaway phone had continued sending out messages even beyond the boundaries of the family. According to further reports by the News Tribune, Courtney's friends also received some degree of these bizarre messages. It seemed like anyone who was in her contacts list was being targeted, and at one point, the bullseye landed on one Taylor McKay, Courtney's friend and next-door neighbor. Soon enough, the messages would spread to the entire McKay family, and so would the threats. At one point, Mrs. McKay claimed that she'd been slicing limes in her kitchen, and that's when she received a message stating, quote, "I prefer lemons." Another family, the Zimmermans, had heard about all the chaos surrounding the community and offered their sympathy, which seemed to cause them to be targeted as well. This time, the caller made inappropriate comments towards the household's teenage daughter, Kayleen, whose phone was supposedly later hacked into. From there, a photo was downloaded from the phone and emailed directly to the girl's mother. Perhaps worst of all for the Zimmermans was one episode in which the father of the family claimed to hear a suspicious noise coming from near Kayleen's room, and there he found a window busted in and a nightstand tipped over. Now, luckily, their daughter wasn't home at the time, and needless to say, she could have potentially dodged a bullet here. As the months continued to go by, the disturbing incidents continued. At one point, for example, while Courtney was out babysitting, the hackers managed to call the cell phone of the child she was meant to watch over. This was clearly crossing the line even more than it already had. Again, local law enforcement was stumped and pretty obviously convinced that this was entirely a hoax. The Pierce County Sheriff's spokesman, Ed Troyer, had told the News Tribune that their department had their IT guy on the case, and despite over 50 hours of work, he couldn't figure out how any of this was possible. Likewise, a Sprint representative by the name of Matt Sullivan also told the paper that in essence, no tech capable of such a thing even existed. Now, what I just said is a bit questionable, and I'm willing to bet that most of you are hitting that doubt button hard enough to break your tables in half, and security expert and consultant for US Congress James Atkinson would absolutely agree with you. Atkinson explained to the News Tribune that what had happened here was not only plausible, but also, quote, "You do not have to have a strong technical background for someone to do this. They probably have a technically gifted kid who is probably in their neighborhood." And to ABC News, he stated, "You can take photographs remotely, you can track the person's position, you can figure out where their phone is. Most cops have no idea how this is done." Now, having said all this only means that it's possible for this to have been the work of an outside entity, maybe even a classmate of Courtney, but even so, why? Some speculated that this might have been a form of cyberbullying directed at the girl, but if so, then why bother with the dozens of other people? I suppose teenage boredom could explain anything, but regardless, what happened here most likely violated several laws, everything from the obvious harassment all the way to wiretapping, and not to mention the several times where the victims claimed the stalkers appeared at their homes. Now, if this was all done by Courtney, it somehow makes less sense, and to add to the mystery, it almost seems like it couldn't have been her, because at one point her phone had been taken away for the investigation, and lo and behold, her number still sent out messages. With that in mind, it does seem way more likely that her phone wasn't actually the device used to send the voicemails. Overall, the Kirkendall family had replaced their cell phones and opened new accounts several times, but nothing stopped the attacks. Again and again, they continued to pour in, and what made them eventually stop is actually unclear. Reporting on this story seems to dry up around mid-2007, so we can assume that the calls stopped, but as for why, well, it's possible that the Kirkendalls themselves don't know the answer. Regardless, it's the concept here that's chilling. Whether this was real or a massively convoluted hoax involving the participation and silence of dozens of people, we all fear the idea of being watched or spied on, our privacy being invaded. And what's even scarier is that this took place way back in 2007, and since then, stories like this have only become more prominent and easier for sketchy individuals to make a reality. Thank you so much for watching, and I do hope you enjoyed the show, which couldn't have been made possible without the following individuals. T. Gorman, Connor H., Base of Shadow, WH, Zuicha Zales, Ronnie, TBF, Saul A., Michelle G., Guilty Pleasures, Corey Barks, David G., Catherine L., KM, BK Ketchup, PDG, Astro, Tyler T., Bloody the Elf, Amelia J., Andrew L., Esper Nix, Sean the CHB, Eric M., Brandon F., Val C., Danielle G., AJ Runaway, Corey W., Lance Ulysses, Daniel P., Mega Brutal, Sean C., Eddie, Terry the Outlaw, Sebastian N., Jace, Kyle R., Layla R., Bathtime Duck, Zimbledorf the Calzone Consumer, Rye S., Francisco B., Sky Grinder, It's Mitt, YOLO for Jesus, Luck B., Scorian S., Benjamin M., Nick B., Melody, S. PC, Zippo, Keith Z, Matt J, James M, Zerai, and Tiago P. Thank you all so much for your support, and I'll see you all again soon.